My dearest brothers and sisters, this is Tunia speaking. I love you so very much. I am very happy that I can once again talk to you. The channeler has more people that he wants to channel than he has energy to do channelings, so I'm happy that I can bring through another message. Everything in this message is just my perspective. I'm not a perfect person and I don't speak the absolute truth. Also, I'll be generalizing in this message. If I say, for example, that the left or that women do something or think in a certain way, then that will not apply to all left-wingers or to all women. It's just a description of general trends. Let me start out by summarizing this message very briefly, so that you can understand the structure of today's message. Then I'll go and explain everything in more detail. So if this summary doesn't quite make sense, then please read on. I will explain it more thoroughly later in this message. In summary, my message is, women in earlier generations were hurt by men and were kept down by men and were unfairly disadvantaged by men. In reaction to that, we're now in a pendulum swing situation where lots of women are hostile to masculinity or are in resistance to masculinity, for oppression that men did in the past. Also, the political left is feminine and the political right is masculine. Hence, the very fierce fight between the left and the right is in part a gender war, with the feminine left being very hostile and being very much in resistance to the masculine right, because lots of women are in resistance to masculinity. You see this, for example, in the political left trying to censor the right, or trying to shut them up by labeling them as racists. Okay, that was the summary. Now let's explore this in detail. Section: Feminine and Masculine Energy. Later on I'll say that being driven by emotions is a female trait, while being driven by rationality is a male trait. But before I use that as part of my argument, I first want to explain that statement. What I mean by it is that these traits are associated with the feminine and the masculine energy, respectively. Now, both men and women naturally have access to both masculine and feminine energy. So yes, absolutely, a woman can be more rational than emotional, just as a man can be more emotional than rational. However, most women have more feminine than masculine energy, just as most men have more masculine than feminine energy. Also, for most women it feels better and is psychologically healthier for them to be mostly feminine, and for most men it feels better and is psychologically healthier for them to be mostly feminine. There is this idea in spiritual circles that the completely developed spiritual person is 50% feminine and 50% masculine. For a very few people, if they fully let in both masculine and feminine energy, and if they unblock themselves completely, then indeed they will have 50% feminine and 50% masculine power. However, the vast majority of people, if they fully let in both masculine and feminine energy, and if they unblock themselves completely, will be something like 70% energy of their gender and 30% energy of the other gender. Or it might be 80%, 20%, or 60%, 40%, but most people aren't 50%, 50%. Also, people often think that a person can fall into one of three categories. A person is either mostly masculine, mostly feminine, or about as masculine as feminine, the 50% masculine 50% feminine person. I think there's actually a fourth category there, and that most people on Earth fall into this fourth category. My proposed four categories are: mostly masculine, mostly feminine, about as masculine as feminine, or blocked. Blocked means that a person is so emotionally repressed, carries around so much unresolved old pain and is in so much resistance that neither their masculine nor their feminine energy really shines through and is really alive in them. A person who's feminine, or whose masculine energy is alive in them, will be attractive and magnetic towards the half of the population that is attracted to that energy. So for example, lots of men will feel attracted towards a feminine woman, or at least they will appreciate her and possibly feel happy when they interact with her. Well, my claim is that most people are neither feminine, which would magnetically attract people who are attracted to feminine energy, nor masculine, which would magnetically attract people who are attracted to masculine energy. If you have a woman who isn't young or beautiful, but has unblocked feminine energy, then my claim is that she would still attract a large number of men, plus a large number of men would clearly appreciate her and benefit from being around her. Most non-young, non-beautiful women don't have this, because their feminine energy is blocked to a large extent. Now yes, This is a very simplistic way of putting it. Lots of other things play a role too, but this is one important factor. Similarly, most men don't have unblocked masculine energy. Now, I'm not blaming the people on Earth for being blocked like this, because most people become blocked while they're still a child. My beautiful Earth brothers and sisters, I'm so sorry for that. Still, it would benefit people to work through their pain, let in their energy, and to let go of their resistance towards both masculinity and femininity. So for a man, that would be allowing in their masculinity and releasing the resistance to being masculine. And then, as a second step after that, it would be good to work on allowing in their feminine energy and releasing their resistance to femininity. Let me give some examples to illustrate women being in resistance to femininity. One example is that lots of women would actually be happier as a stay-at-home mom, but they are making choices that are not putting them on a path towards becoming a stay-at-home mom. Some women will have negative opinions about stay-at-home moms, while deep down wishing they were one themselves. Another example is that some women will dislike that I said that being driven by emotion is a female trait. Well, why be in resistance to that? That's just part of being a woman, and being driven by emotion is not inherently better or worse than being driven by rationality, as men are. Personally, I am not in resistance to my femininity. Now, sure, I can be rational if I need to be, just like Earth women can be. And if you put me in a situation where I have to be rational and masculine and responsible and in charge all the time and have to work hard, then I can do that, but that would be a survival mode for me. I could do it, but it wouldn't feel good, it wouldn't be psychologically very healthy for me, and it would harden me over time. I don't want to harden. Hence, I've chosen to marry a masculine man, so that I can freely and happily be my emotional self. I took care of our children when they were small, and I created a great space for our children. I keep his stomach full and his balls empty, and I express towards him a sea of love and appreciation and gratitude. And any time I sense that he isn't feeling great, I immediately drop everything I am doing to listen to him and to give him even more love and appreciation. I actively look for ways to support him, and to make his life easier and more pleasant, and to satisfy him sexually and in all other ways I can think of. And unless I feel a hell no, I do what he says. I am his. He's my captain and I am enjoying the journey, so very much. In return, I can just be and just feel and just experience, I can be my emotional self. My life is amazing, I don't have to work if I don't want to, and I have a hard time imagining how I could be any happier. My husband and children certainly aren't blaming me for being a woman and having emotions. They're not blaming me for sometimes being bubbly and affectionate, for sometimes feeling playful or mischievous or silly, for sometimes, often being horny, for sometimes being a chaos goblin, and sometimes for crying when I look down to earth and I see what is happening there and it hurts my heart. What I described here is my flavor of unblocked femininity. And men absolutely love this energy, and are drawn to it. And I love men too. I love men so very, very much. It's because of men that my life is so amazing. Thank you, men, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is my flavor of having unblocked feminine energy, and not being in resistance to either masculinity or femininity. You can see how it's magnetic. On Earth, people often call this the divine feminine. Personally, I prefer the term having unblocked feminine energy. After all, the term divine feminine sounds religious, and the term also suggests that there's one type of energy that's feminine, and another type of energy that's divine feminine. But in reality, a divine feminine woman is just a woman who fully allows in her feminine energy, and who doesn't have resistance to masculinity or femininity. Also, the term divine feminine suggests that there's a binary, either a woman is feminine, or she's divine feminine. In reality, it's more of a spectrum. A woman can be completely blocked in her feminine energy, completely unblocked, or somewhere in between. I think you can see that most Earth people aren't unblocked like this, or are even close to being unblocked like this. Most people haven't fully allowed in their femininity or masculinity, and most people are to at least some extent in resistance to both femininity and masculinity. Again, I don't blame you, I know you have suffered and I am sorry for that. But, well, if women work on allowing in their femininity and releasing their resistance towards both femininity and masculinity, that could dramatically help them and mankind at large. Same for men. In the West, the default is that both genders should have roughly the same responsibilities and orientations. Both should work, both should cook, both should clean, both should plan trips together, both have roughly the same role in the household. Neither person takes the lead. Frankly, this being the default strikes me as resistance to masculinity and femininity. Because, yes, people exist for whom these androgynous gender roles are optimal, however, most people would do better with traditional gender roles. Sure, drop the nonsense part such as women not being allowed to go to university, but otherwise I do think that most people would be happier living in a relationship where different genders have different roles, rather than pushing everyone into an androgynous, half masculine, half feminine gender role. In my mind, you had the situation where everyone was forced into these gender roles, and obviously that was bad, because these gender roles aren't optimal for everyone. And now we're in a pendulum swing situation where traditional gender roles are seen as bad and uncool and backwards, and people are in resistance to them. However, I think this is just a pendulum that was too far to one end. People are forced into gender roles, and now it has swung too far to the other end. Gender roles are seen as backwards. I think the sensible middle is that couples are free to determine their relationship dynamic. However, the traditional gender roles are seen as optimal for most people, and certainly not as backwards. Although admittedly, with the economy being as bad as it is, it may be tough to have just one provider. But even if both people have to work, you can still do what I described in my previous message titled Tunia, Leading and Following in Relationships, NSFW. After all, most men prefer dating a woman who is feminine, family-oriented, and who is willing to cook and clean. Most women prefer, all else being equal, dating a man who makes at least as much and ideally a bit more money than she does, and who has leadership qualities, and it's kind of sexy if he's able to protect her. People can pretend that gender roles are backwards, but when dating, most people are still looking for partners who fit into the traditional gender role, or at least into an updated version of the traditional gender role with the silly bits removed. Hence, I think this whole idea of traditional gender roles are backwards is just resistance to masculinity and femininity. And I think that resistance was created back when gender roles were enforced too strictly even on people who didn't fit within those gender roles, plus there were obviously bad things like women not being allowed to go to university. But of course, you can have a relationship where the man takes the lead, and also the woman is allowed to go to university and is allowed to speak her mind, etc. After all, most men are still attracted to feminine women, and most women are still attracted to masculine men, although lots of women are simultaneously in resistance to masculine men, as we'll discuss later in this message. So you see how deep this resistance to masculinity and this resistance to femininity goes. We have our first piece of the puzzle. We have explored people being in resistance to masculinity or femininity. Section: the left is feminine and the right is masculine. The next piece of our puzzle is: the American modern mainstream left is generally feminine and the American modern mainstream right is generally masculine. Have you noticed that? Now sure, left-wing men exist. Right-wing women exist also, especially because the left is currently going off the rails. Still, the left is still mainly feminine and the right is still mainly masculine. For example, the left is generally more driven by emotions and feelings, a female trait, while the right is generally more driven by rationality, a male trait. The left loves to claim that they are the rational ones because they have these scientists who back them up, but it's not really science if you cancel scientists who undermine your position. In actuality, the left often emotionally decides what their policy is going to be, and then they find or create science that supports them, and if necessary they cancel or at least ignore scientists who don't support them. That's not actually a rational approach. That's more of a weaponization of science to ram things through that the left likes on an emotional level. Indeed, this doesn't apply to everyone on the left. I'll be talking about the American modern mainstream left and the American modern mainstream right in this message, and I know that not everyone on the left agrees with the American modern mainstream left. And, look, I'm not saying that being driven by emotions is worse than being driven by rationality. I know that people are in resistance to femininity, but it's actually completely fine to be driven by emotion. The problem doesn't come from the left being emotional. In an ideal world, The emotional left and the rational right would balance each other out in a constructive debate, and good policy comes from that. Indeed, the rational, masculine right can be too cold and callous, and sometimes it needs the emotional, caretaking left to balance it out. So the problem isn't the left being emotional, the problem is that the left has effectively declared war on the right, instead of seeing the right as having another valid perspective against which the left can balance out its own positions. Let me give some further examples why the modern mainstream left is indeed feminine. We know that the left cares about inclusivity and taking care of others, including illegal immigrants. Well, that's the female caretaker instinct right there. And the female caretaker instinct is a beautiful and valuable instinct. It's just that it's an instinct that should be balanced out by the male instinct of making sure that the own tribe is protected and cared for. The problem isn't that women, the left, have the instinct to take care of illegal immigrants. The problem is that the left isn't seeing the male instinct as equally valid and as something to balance out their own perspective with. And the male protector and provider instincts are these immigrants dangerous? Can we afford to let them in? The female left has effectively declared war on the masculine right, and isn't balancing out their own caretaker instinct against the protector and provider instinct. Hence the US immigration policy has become way too left-wing. Similarly, better choices would have been made during COVID times if the feminine left, who cared about saving grandma, had seen the masculine right as valid and as worth listening to. After all, the right argued that personal responsibility and freedom and mental health mattered as well, and that some amount of risk was just inherent to life. But the left didn't listen and they censored the right and accused them of trying to kill grandma, and the left lobbied for very damaging policies during COVID times. Yes, I know there's a dark controller backdrop to this too, but the dark controllers couldn't have succeeded in their agenda if left-wing people hadn't been in resistance to masculinity. Now, yes, the right absolutely isn't perfect either, and it's true that the right also doesn't like the left. However, at least the right doesn't generally try to censor the left, and doesn't hurl vicious labels at anyone who disagrees with them. For example, calling someone a racist for being against illegal immigration is very unfair and quite hurtful, and that really kills the discussion. Accusing someone who opposes COVID policies of wanting to kill grandma is very hurtful as well. This isn't the left seeing the right as having a valid perspective, this is the left wanting the right to not have a voice. The right is imperfect, but it doesn't generally try to censor the left, and it doesn't throw vicious, hurtful discussion destroying insults at the left to nearly the same degree. Why has the feminine left declared war on the masculine right? That's because men used to oppress women, and we're now in a pendulum swing situation where women are hostile to masculinity. However, while this is understandable, fighting masculinity isn't actually the solution. Calling everyone who disagrees with the feminine left a racist or a far-right extremist isn't the solution. You can see that in the border crisis. The left is at war with the right, and the result is bad policy, because the feminine left and the masculine right actually need to balance themselves out against each other. And the left can't balance itself out against the right if it sees them as far-right extremist racists who should be censored. If people disagree with me that a lot of, but certainly not all, women are hostile to masculinity, then keep in mind that there's actually a lot of discrimination against men, in divorce court, in criminal court, there's gender quotas and there's women hiring women. There's women creating women-only spaces while also insisting on being let into male-only spaces, and then insisting that those spaces be changed to suit them. Education in general is very boy-unfriendly because most boys aren't wired to sit still for 8 or so hours per day. Also, more women go to university than men, yet there are still more women-only than male-only scholarships. Plus, a shocking number of female teachers give boys lower grades than girls. There was a study that when female teachers grade blindly, without seeing the name, then suddenly girls started scoring lower and boys started scoring higher. This implies that when female teachers do see names, a not insignificant number of them grade boys lower, due to their hostility to masculinity. Women are allowed to negatively stereotype against men, but men aren't allowed to negatively stereotype against anyone, even if men can statistically show that a certain group indeed more often does a certain negative thing. This is a double standard. Also, women groups often allow women in their midst who are openly hostile to men, and women insist that these women groups aren't hateful because most women in those groups aren't hateful. So you're not allowed to say that feminism is a hateful movement, even if you can point towards some individual feminists who are clearly hateful and who aren't denounced by other feminists. Yet on the other hand, if male groups allow men in their midst who are openly hostile to women, then the entire male group gets labeled as hateful and sexist, and the entire group may get banned. So, there's clearly a lot of hostility and resistance towards men and towards masculinity. There is discrimination against men, yet women will often not do more than give lip service to the idea of changing something that is discriminatory against men and that is rigged in favor of women. Meanwhile, women will take actual action to change things in favor of women. For example, the wage gap has repeatedly been shown to not exist if you compare similar male to female situations. Yet more women are fighting to address the non-existing wage gap than women are trying to solve the very real and blatant discrimination that men face. If today a report was published that most workplace deaths were female, then everyone would immediately pass legislation to protect women and make pledges to help female employees. However, because it's actually men who are dying more in the workplace, no one does anything. At most you will have people giving lip service to the idea of changing this. This illustrates that women, the left, are in resistance to masculinity, the right. I have heard the women are victims, therefore we must help them first argument, but women in 2024 in the West really aren't more oppressed than men are. This anti-masculinity stance of the left isn't actual justice, it's just a pendulum swing reaction to men having mistreated women in the past. And while it's understandable, it's not fair or productive to collectively punish men for the crimes of their ancestors. One example of this pendulum swing is, women used to have the choice between being quiet and agreeing with her husband. Obviously, that's unfair. But the solution isn't to do the same thing to men, which the left is roughly doing with their stance of, it's not socially acceptable for men to disagree with women or so-called oppressed groups, because men don't understand the privilege that they have. So if men contradict women, shame them until they shut up. Obviously, it is completely fine for the left, women, to disagree with the right, men. However, the modern left doesn't just disagree. They actively try to silence the right. This is social media censorship, cancel culture, the deplatforming movement, trying to lobby companies to change their message or the contents of their products, shaming men by calling them racists, labeling reasonable men as far-right extremists, etc. All of these things are quite hurtful and destructive, and they stop men from having a voice. Plus, this leads to very bad policy. You get good policy if the left and right see each other as having a valid perspective against which they can balance out their view, and then have an open debate, where no one gets called a far-right extremist or gets censored. Now, people on the right might argue, the modern left is insane, there is no balancing out my perspective against that. And, unfortunately, I can see that argument. Find people on the left with sane positions and without hostility to masculinity, and have a discussion with those people, I guess. People on the left might also argue, I'm not going to balance out my perspective against the right, they're all racists or stupid or extremists or fascists. Here I don't agree as much. While, yes, the modern right is absolutely flawed and can be a bit too cold and callous, I think they're really not as extreme as the left seem to think they are. For example, opposing illegal immigration isn't an extreme position, no matter how much the left might want to pretend that it is. I think it's more that the modern American mainstream left is extreme, and therefore for them the right looks very far to the right, but that's just because in reality the left is very far to the left. And the left is very far to the left because they're refusing to balance out their perspective against the right-wing, male perspective. And they're refusing to balance out their perspective against the right because women are in resistance to masculinity, due to the pendulum swing situation. Men and women are complementary. A society can only thrive if men and women genuinely work together, and this doesn't mean working together with men after you emasculate them, censor them, cancel them, depower them, discriminate against them, and police their language. That's just hostility and resistance to men who are actually masculine. Indeed, you can see that the left mostly works together with men who aren't very masculine, because left-wing women see masculine men as potential oppressors, potential rapists, or as potential evil capitalists who exploit the workers. The not very masculine men that the left does have aren't properly balancing out or pushing back against the extreme positions of the left. You need actually masculine men to do that, which most left-wing men aren't. Now, most men on the right also aren't tapping into their full masculine energy, but men on the right are still typically more masculine than men on the left are. Now, pendulum swings happen all the time, in lots of situations, between lots of different groups. So I'm not saying that women are bad for being in resistance to masculinity. Women were oppressed, and are now in a pendulum swing situation, just as many other groups have been in a pendulum swing situation before them. So women aren't evil or flawed or anything. However, it's still useful to recognize the female resistance to masculinity in the current situation. Indeed, research shows that more than half of all young white liberal women have a diagnosed mental health issue, and of course, that's only the diagnosed mental health issues. I think this illustrates my earlier statement that it's profoundly unhealthy, both for society and for the individual, to be fighting the other gender. Which is what lots of, not all, women are currently doing. And yes, some men absolutely do this too. Still, I very much wish that my beautiful and amazing Earth sisters would stop fighting against masculinity, because ultimately it only hurts others and themselves. After all, women not on the left generally aren't in resistance to masculinity, and those women have fewer mental issues than women on the left do. So, what can practically be done? Well, for women, I would like to invite you to look inside and to observe if you still have some resistance, or resentment, or pain, or wounding with regards towards men. If you do, I am sorry, but also, ultimately the solution to inner pain can't be found in the outside world. The solution to inner pain is inner work. As for men, this situation may be tough and unfair to you. You don't deserve to be treated the way that the left is treating you. I am sorry. This is a pendulum swing, meaning that women will eventually come back to the more balanced center, although that might still take some time. In the meantime, don't let your country get destroyed. The world still very much needs masculinity, no matter what some women and what society may be trying to tell you. Now, we have stated that men used to oppress women, and now there's a pendulum swing where some women are trying to fight men. How exactly do women do this, or in other words, how does the left do this? It's not legally feasible to pass laws that openly state that we're going to discriminate against men. Well, one way is the kind of subtle anti-male discrimination we talked about earlier. Also, the feminine left uses the weapons in the teenage girl's toolbox, namely, engage in gossip and reputation destruction and bullying. For example, the left calls people on the right racists or deplorables or far-right extremists, even when that's not justified. Expel people from the group. For example, the left deplatforms and censors people. Manipulate language. For example, no one is illegal even though by law they are. Withhold or manipulate or manipulatively present information, and ignore or block contrary information. For example, this happened with COVID. Double standards. For example, Trump walking slowly down a stairs and him misspeaking allegedly proves that he's unfit to be president, but Biden falling down on stairs and his obvious cognitive decline aren't proof that Biden is unfit to be president. Divide the world into good and evil. For example, immigrants are good and Trump supporters are bad. Russia is 100% bad and Ukraine is 100% good. Trump is obviously 100% evil and must be stopped at all costs, even though that is not a rational position. Bend over backwards trying to fit in. For example, virtue signaling, and left-wingers agreeing with left-wing positions even if they are clearly extreme and harmful. Claim victim status. For example, the holeless women are victims even though women in the West in 2024 really aren't more oppressed than men are. If you can't win an argument, then attack people personally, or say that you are offended, or say that the other person is mean. For example, the left overemphasizes the damage caused by mean Trump's tweets. Obviously not all women do this, and not everyone on the left does this. But I think you can see the overall tendency. Section: Why dating is terrible. What I have explained so far also gives us a clue why dating is so terrible nowadays. Obviously, there are many factors, but one of the factors is that left-wing women aren't attracted to left-wing men because they're generally speaking not masculine. Left-wing women also aren't attracted to right-wing men because women are in resistance to the masculine right. So that leaves left-wing women with, well, no one. Hence, where have all the good men gone? So then you have the weird situation where the left-wing woman says that she wants a man who has all these soft, feminine, left-wing attributes and beliefs, but the woman is not actually attracted to such men. Yet the woman is also too much in resistance to masculinity to just come out and say that she wants a masculine man. So then she goes and sleeps with some hot masculine narcissistic jerk who is the opposite of what she says she wants. Why does she do this? Well, he's hot and his masculinity is almost like water in the desert to her. But of course, narcissistic jerks are narcissistic jerks, so either she doesn't start a relationship with him, or she does but then the relationship explodes and she loudly proclaims that all men are narcissists. She could have chosen a non-narcissistic left-wing man, but most of them are not masculine. Or she could have chosen a non-narcissistic right-wing man, and some of them are masculine, however she's in resistance to the masculine right wing. To try and keep themselves safe, women have destroyed masculinity in many men, through shaming and through mothers destroying masculinity in their sons. Because after all, masculine men are oppressors and rapists and evil capitalists, in the mind of women who are gripped by the pendulum swing. Hence, there aren't that many masculine men around. I understand that no mother consciously thinks let's destroy the masculinity in my son, but unfortunately, that is what often happens if the mother is in resistance to masculinity and tries to raise a good man. Or if the woman has a child with an unsuitable man and then has to raise the child with the father either being absent or being a bad role model. Or if the woman views masculinity as toxic. Yes, I know that women will say that the term toxic masculinity doesn't mean that masculinity is toxic, but the reality is that a lot of women do actually think that masculinity is toxic, or at least dangerous to women, or that masculinity leads to evil capitalists exploiting the workers. This is due to the pendulum swing we discussed earlier. Masculine men oppressed us women, therefore masculinity is toxic, or so goes the unconscious thought pattern. Women have significantly limited the supply of masculine men, which means that it's not easy to acquire a masculine man. So what could happen is that our heroine finds a masculine guy she likes, but then that masculine guy either picks a younger and more beautiful woman over her because he has infinite options, or he chooses to never settle down and to just sleep with a bunch of women instead. So, let's say that our young left-wing woman has spent some time sleeping around with hot masculine jerks, who are either unsuitable for a relationship, or who have so many options that he doesn't want a relationship with her. Now she decides that she wants a serious relationship. What should she do? She could settle down with some non-masculine guy after all, and be unhappy because he's not masculine, and probably the sex will dry up at some point. Even years into the relationship, she might be secretly fantasizing about that one hot masculine guy who she slept with years ago, but who would never commit to her. Or she might decide that she's not going to settle and she aims for an attractive, masculine, non-right-wing guy. And indeed, she's right that she would be happy with such a man. However, most young women are left-wing, and now they're all hunting for the same tiny group of hot, masculine, non-right-wing men. Which means that men look at this and conclude that most young women are all hunting for the same top 5% or so of guys, which isn't completely accurate but isn't completely inaccurate either. And men just drop out of society, because what's the point? Why not play video games all day if the women you want to date are all busy chasing the same top 5% of guys? Hence, a good bit of the pickiness that young Earth women currently demonstrate ultimately comes from female resistance to masculinity, and hence women refusing to just settle down with a good, non-exceptional, masculine man with stereotypically masculine, i.e. right-wing, beliefs. Obviously, I'm hugely generalizing right now. Dating is slightly less awful for older people than it is for younger people. And certainly a lot of left-wing women are in happy relationships. But then again, there also are a huge number of involuntary single women. Not to mention that the average young man probably doesn't have the combination of both masculinity and reasonable attractiveness and non-right-wing beliefs that most young women demand, and that's why 60% of young men are single. Section: Trump Derangement Syndrome. Here's another interesting point. Have you figured out yet why Trump drives the left so unbelievably crazy, to the point where people use the phrase Trump derangement syndrome to describe how otherwise rational people can become seemingly deranged in their opposition to Trump? Now, to be clear, Trump absolutely is flawed, both as a president and as a man. We have called him a gray hat in the past. Still, if you just look at the United States objectively, Trump's term was much more calm and stable and peaceful and prosperous than Biden's is, and yet the left accuses Trump of everything bad under the sun. Many of the things that the left accuses Trump of are either just not true, or are things that are at least as bad with Biden. For example, Biden has a quite racist voting record and has made some horrible statements about black people. Yet the left calls Trump a racist. The left constantly accuses Trump of wanting to start new wars, yet Trump started no new wars, while the world seems to be consumed in flames under Biden's administration. The United States might tear itself apart over Biden's handling of the border. Yet the left calls Trump the dangerous one. The left calls Trump cognitively unable or too old to be president, yet that situation is worse with Biden. So, what's going on? Well, the left really dislikes Trump emotionally for a reason that I'll share shortly. And therefore everything Trump does is viewed through a hostile lens, and hence he looks like a monster. Meanwhile, everything Biden does is viewed through a "we must keep the orange man away from the White House" lens, and therefore left-wingers are inclined to excuse Biden's behavior. Personally, I don't think anything that Trump did is as bad as Biden funding and arming Israel while Israel is, in my opinion, committing genocide in Palestine. Biden is, in my opinion, enabling genocide. I don't think anything Trump did is as bad as that. Luckily, that argument seems to be reaching some people on the feminine left, because now the female caretaker instinct is turning towards protecting Palestinians and against Biden. Still, why does or did Trump drive the left so unbelievably crazy? It's because Trump is, unabashedly and unashamedly, masculine. He's rich. He's big. He says what he thinks. He likes winning. He does what he thinks should be done, no matter what people think, no matter if it's polite or socially acceptable to do. And he also protects and provides for the American people, albeit in a crude and quite imperfect way. And the left is in resistance to masculine men, doubly so if they are in positions of power. Triply so if they clearly display not just positive aspects of masculinity but also negative aspects of masculinity. Namely, Trump grabs women by the pussy. He brags. He's loud. He can be crude. He says hurtful things. He insults people. He likes to troll the left. He doesn't care about being nice or getting along. He doesn't care about people's feelings. He clearly prioritizes Americans over non-Americans, even if those non-Americans are struggling and thus are triggering the female caretaker instinct. And even worse, people like Trump. That wasn't supposed to happen. Us left-wingers were supposed to have defanged and silenced and crushed masculinity, but now people are rallying around an unashamedly masculine man. And that is why Trump drives the left crazy. He's masculine, both in positive and negative aspects, and the left is very much in resistance to masculinity. Hence, Trump triggers women who were hurt by men, or women who still carry around pain from past oppression of women, or men who aren't as masculine as they would like to be, or men who were taught that masculinity is bad and that a man can only be good if he rejects parts of his masculinity. Now yes, the right absolutely isn't perfect, and neither are Earth men. Still, a huge issue is that the female left is at war with masculinity, with the male right not being at war with femininity to the same extent, which you can see by the right not trying to censor the left as much. In fact, some men want women to be women, more than women want women to be women. Now, yes, I understand that the left elected Biden and that Biden is a man. However, it's not really about genitals. Obviously women and the left are fine with men existing. But Biden represents the type of neutered, harmless, non-masculine man that the left is okay with, at least until Israel started its, in my opinion, genocide. Hence, the left can accept to have him power. Because if you must have a man in power, at least let him be neutered and powerless, as a man should be. So, assuming the election is between Trump and Biden, do you want men to be powerless and neutered? Vote Biden. Do you want men to be strong, with their imperfections and flaws and toxic aspects and all? Vote Trump. Personally, I love men, and I value men. So, I've pointed out a lot of things that I thought were dysfunctional and weren't helpful. Finally, let's talk about what people can do and what would be helpful. I already suggested that people do their individual work, letting in their masculine or feminine energy and releasing their resistance and old pain. Other than this, how can we fix politics? Well, to answer that, let's use the immigration debate as an example. There are two good options to move forward. One is the straightforward one: the left and right both get to both freely make their argument. This also means that people don't get called a racist just for opposing illegal immigration, and that people are allowed to present statistics about how much crime immigrants commit versus how much crime native-born Americans commit. And then, after a healthy and open debate where people can speak freely, let the voter decide, in a non-manipulated election. The second option is what us Pleiadian women do, where we say to our men, our beloved men, thank you so much for continuing to keep us safe and continuing to provide for us. We love you so very much, and we owe so many of the good things in our lives to you, our beloved and treasured men. If you have any concerns or struggles, please feel free to talk to us, and we will listen to you with all our hearts. We will help you and make room for you, just like you are making room for us. Please continue keeping us safe and providing for us. We recognize that because we place this burden on you, because we hold you responsible for this, it is only fair that we also give you the authority to be able to fulfill your responsibility. In other words, our amazing and beloved men, we ask that you help keep us safe, and therefore we give you the authority to decide on immigration policy. We have the right to vote on immigration, we just choose not to vote on that specific topic. So, the choice is yours. Just, please be compassionate. But ultimately it's up to you. We trust you, we appreciate you, and we love you so very much. Thank you for everything you're doing for society and for us, women. I can guarantee you that if Earth women sincerely approached men in this way, that society would start healing immediately. Currently this channeler is crying after he wrote down those words. With that, and with all my love, I wish you a good week. Your star sister, Tunia.